The awakening of a new dawn. The stars had always been humanity's ultimate horizon, but tonight, they felt different. Tonight, the stars seemed closer, almost within reach. Captain Emily Hawke gazed out the bridge of the HMS Resilience, her fingers lightly brushing the control panel in front of her, as the deep hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the walls. The Resilience wasn't just any starship. It was humanity's greatest achievement, a symbol of the strength and ingenuity that had saved Earth from the brink of destruction. It had been built for one purpose: to ensure that humanity's story didn't end in the cold void of space, at the hands of a foe too powerful to defeat. But now, Emily and her crew faced a mission greater than any they had ever undertaken, a mission that would test not just their skills, but their very spirit. The galaxy had always been filled with strange and dangerous forces. Many races had once thought humanity weak, easy targets for exploitation and conquest. But the Zothar Empire, a massive and ruthless alien civilization, had underestimated Earth's capacity for resilience. In their eyes, humanity had been nothing more than a brief footnote in the annals of galactic history, destined to be swept away like so many other civilizations before them. But Earth had proven them wrong. The Zothar had attacked without mercy, targeting human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Entire cities were reduced to ashes, entire populations wiped out. The terror they wrought in their wake was unimaginable, but the Zothar had underestimated one thing: humanity's will to fight back. Captain Hawke's thoughts drifted back to those dark days. The Battle of Villaris Station, where she had led her first strike against the Zothar fleet, was still fresh in her mind. The explosion of energy beams, the shriek of damaged hulls, the desperate moments when survival seemed impossible, all of it had shaped her. And it had shaped humanity. The battle had been costly, but the Zothar had learned that humans would not back down. Months had passed since the end of the Zothar War, and a fragile peace treaty had been signed, ending the bloodshed, for now. But Emily knew that peace was never guaranteed. It was a thin veil, one that could tear at any moment, and the Zothar Empire had already shown signs of dissatisfaction with the truce. Tensions were rising, and the fragile alliance that held the galaxy together seemed ready to fracture. The Resilience, though it was a warship, now carried the hopes of a peaceful future. But peace could only last if humanity had the strength to protect it. "Captain, we're approaching the Zothar border," said Lieutenant Marcus, her second in command, his voice steady but laced with an undertone of uncertainty. Emily nodded, her fingers tightening around the armrest of her chair. "Alert the fleet. Prepare for any eventuality," she ordered, her voice calm, but her mind racing. She had never imagined that humanity would one day find itself in such a position, standing at the edge of a new chapter in its galactic journey, but surrounded by so many unknowns. Outside the viewport, the vast expanse of space stretched out, littered with nebula and distant stars. The Resilience moved forward, its sleek form cutting through the cosmos like a blade. It was alone on this mission, with no backup, no reinforcements. This was a test, one that would determine whether humanity could continue to thrive in a galaxy that seemed to want to tear them apart. The ship's sensors flickered, and suddenly, the calm of space was shattered by a sharp alarm. "Captain, unidentified ships ahead," Lieutenant Marcus shouted. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She knew what this meant. There was only one enemy who would dare challenge humanity this close to the border: the Zothar. "Battle stations," Emily barked, her voice cutting through the tension like a whip. The crew jumped into action, their movements synchronized from years of training. The calm of the bridge turned to controlled chaos as the crew prepared for what could be the most significant battle of their lives. "Captain, we have a fleet on intercept course," Marcus reported, his voice tight. The Zothar had come to meet them, and they weren't alone. There were dozens of ships, warships, capital ships, and smaller tactical vessels, moving into position. This was no mere reconnaissance force. This was a full-scale assault. Emily's mind raced. Her first instinct was to retaliate, But she knew that the stakes were too high. This wasn't just about winning a battle. This was about ensuring humanity's survival in the face of overwhelming odds. She had to be smart. She had to outthink them. "Bring us into range," she ordered. "Target their flagships. I want full power to the forward shields and weapons." The ship shook slightly as the Resilience fired its thrusters and closed the gap with the approaching enemy fleet. Emily's eyes narrowed as she studied the Zothar ships through the tactical display. They were aggressive, but there was a pattern to their movements, a flaw in their strategy. "Captain," said Lieutenant Marcus, his voice urgent, "there's a new ship among them. Something we haven't seen before. It's massive, far larger than any Zothar warship we've encountered." Emily's pulse quickened. Could it be a new weapon? A new class of ship? "It's possible. It's emitting a strange energy signature," Marcus replied. The unknown vessel's size and power were enough to make even the seasoned crew of the Resilience uneasy. The crew's tension was palpable as the Resilience closed in on the Zothar fleet. Emily had faced overwhelming odds before, but this was different. The stakes had never been higher. Humanity's entire future hung in the balance. She had to make her move, quickly and decisively. "Target that new ship," Emily ordered, her voice unwavering. "Lock on with all weapons. We'll take out their command ship first and throw their fleet into disarray." As the Resilience moved into firing position, Emily's mind flashed back to the countless lives that had been lost in the war. The innocent lives on the colonies, the people who had fought so hard for humanity's survival. She couldn't let them down. Not now. Not when they were so close to securing their future. With a decisive motion, she gave the command. "Fire." The Resilience fired its weapons, a barrage of energy blasts and missiles raining down on the Zothar fleet. For a moment, the bridge was filled with the roar of cannon fire and the crackle of energy beams as the ship's weapons unleashed their fury. But Emily didn't wait to see if the strike was successful. The Zothar would retaliate. She knew that the real battle was just beginning. The edge of extinction. The HMS Resilience rocked under the first salvo from the Zothar fleet, the force of the enemy's weapons slamming against the ship's forward shields. Emily Hawke gritted her teeth, barely noticing the tremor that coursed through her body. She'd been through worse, much worse. But today, it felt different, more personal. The stakes had changed. The Zothar were no longer just invaders. They were a force bent on wiping humanity from the galaxy once and for all. "Captain, shields are holding at 60%. We're taking direct hits, but nothing critical," Lieutenant Marcus reported, his voice a bit strained but composed. "Incoming fire from the flagship. Massive energy pulse." Emily's eyes flickered to the screen, and her stomach churned. The massive Zothar flagship, unlike any vessel they had faced before, fired a devastating pulse of energy. It struck the Resilience's shields, making the whole ship shudder violently. "Increase forward shield strength," Emily barked, gripping her armrest tightly. Her crew was composed, but there was no hiding the gravity of the situation now. The Zothar's flagship was no ordinary ship. It was an entire floating city of weaponry and technology, a symbol of the Empire's overwhelming strength. The enemy fleet, numbering close to 50 ships, was in perfect formation, anticipating every move the Resilience made. "Adjust course. Evasive maneuver," Emily ordered again. The Resilience veered sharply to the left, narrowly dodging another barrage of plasma fire. "Deploy the countermeasures. Launch all drones. We need distractions." Small combat drones shot out from the flanks of the Resilience, zigzagging through the vacuum of space. They created a cloud of decoys, designed to confuse the Zothar targeting systems. But Emily knew that the Zothar had seen it all before. They were ruthless and relentless, with strategies that surpassed anything the humans had encountered. For a fleeting moment, the ship seemed to be making headway. The drones drew fire away from the Resilience, creating small explosions in the distance. But the Zothar flagship was not fooled for long. It quickly recalibrated its weapons, laser-focused on the human ship. "Captain, we have another ship on the radar," Lieutenant Marcus warned, his voice low but sharp. "It's moving fast, approaching from the rear." A cold realization gripped Emily's heart. "It's a trap," she muttered to herself. "We've been lured into their kill zone." The new ship that appeared on the radar was not like the others. It was sleek, maneuverable, and designed for precision strikes. It had a high-energy signature that suggested it was armed with advanced weaponry, likely the cutting-edge technology that the Zothar had been developing in secret. "Brace for impact," Emily shouted, but it was too late. The enemy ship fired a deadly salvo of concentrated energy beams, striking the Resilience's starboard side. Sparks flew, and alarms blared as the shields collapsed in that area. The ship tilted slightly, throwing the crew off balance. "Shields failing on the starboard side, Captain." "Hull integrity at 70%, reported Lieutenant Roshni, the communications officer. She looked at Emily with a mix of concern and determination. "We've lost several drone fighters, too. Their precision is terrifying." Emily clenched her fists. The Resilience was built for battle, but nothing in their design had prepared them for the sheer force of the Zothar's overwhelming might. Humanity had never fought a war on this scale before. Every time they pushed back, the Zothar came at them harder. "Reinforce the hull in the damaged sector," Emily ordered, "and get the repair teams to work on those systems. We can't afford to lose power in the middle of this fight." "Captain," Marcus interjected, "we've detected a large energy buildup in the Zothar flagship's core. They're preparing to fire a high-impact energy pulse, something much stronger than the last one." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The Zothar's high-energy pulse could obliterate anything in its path, and they didn't have enough time to escape its blast radius. If it hit the Resilience, the ship would be torn apart. "Evasive maneuvers," Emily barked. "Full power to engines, hard to port." The Resilience lurched violently as it changed direction, narrowly avoiding the incoming pulse from the Zothar flagship. The explosion left a shockwave in its wake, rocking the ship again. The crew scrambled to maintain their footing as they were tossed around by the blast's force. "Status report," Emily demanded, as she struggled to remain steady in her seat. "Shields down to 40%, Marcus reported grimly. "We've lost power to the aft engines. Repairs underway, but they'll take time. And Captain, there's something else." "What?" Emily's voice was tight, but there was no hiding the unease that crept in. "The Zothar flagship's energy pulse. It's not just a weapon. It's a super weapon. And it's charging up again. They're targeting us directly." The ship's sensors blared an urgent warning as the Zothar flagship aimed its devastating weapon. Emily's mind raced. They didn't have enough time to outrun it. There was only one thing they could do. "Prepare to return fire," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering in her chest. "We're not going down without a fight. All hands, brace for impact. Launch everything we've got. Let's give them everything we have." The crew of the Resilience was working together, each person performing their duties with precision. But Emily knew they were at the limit of their endurance. Their ship was powerful, but it was no match for a fleet this size, especially with the Zothar flagship poised to deal the final blow. As the countdown to the Zothar weapons discharge began, Emily saw the looming silhouette of the flagship through the viewport, its weapons glowing with menacing intensity. There was no more room for error. "Get those weapons online now," Emily roared, her voice cutting through the chaos of the bridge. The Resilience shuddered as its main weapon system came to life. Massive cannons, previously dormant, hummed with a deep, resonating power. A series of rapid-fire energy blasts shot out toward the flagship, striking its shields and causing a brief moment of disorientation. But it wasn't enough. The Zothar flagship unleashed its superweapon with terrifying precision, and Emily's heart stopped as the pulse of energy streaked toward the Resilience. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as the pulse approached, filling the viewport with a blinding light. The crew braced themselves for the inevitable, praying that their efforts had been enough to withstand the onslaught. And then, as the light flooded the bridge, there was nothing. The battle for survival. The blinding light of the Zothar superweapon exploded before Emily's eyes. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as she watched the pulse of energy cut through the black void of space, heading straight for the HMS Resilience. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she thought the ship was lost. The blast was so powerful that it distorted the space around it, a surge of raw energy that threatened to vaporize everything in its path. The crew braced for the inevitable, their bodies locked in tension as they awaited the crushing blow. But the Resilience didn't disintegrate. Instead, there was a deafening sound of engines roaring to life, followed by a sudden jolt that sent the entire bridge into chaos. The ship lurched forward, its engines firing at maximum power, pushing it just out of the path of the destructive pulse. The energy blast struck the side of the Resilience, its shields flickering violently under the strain, but they held. Barely. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to stay in her seat. Her fingers tightened around the armrests, and she looked around the bridge, seeing the same shock and disbelief in her crew's eyes. They had narrowly avoided being obliterated. "Damage report," Emily shouted, trying to remain calm despite the overwhelming sense of relief that washed over her. "We've taken heavy damage to the starboard side, Captain," Lieutenant Marcus reported, his voice shaking but clear. "The shields are barely functioning. Hull integrity is at 45%, and there's a breach in the auxiliary reactor core. We're losing power in multiple systems." The ship's alarms continued to blare, the shrill sound echoing throughout the bridge as crew members scrambled to assess the damage and make repairs. Emily's mind raced. They had survived the blast, but they were not out of danger. The Zothar fleet was still out there, and they were already gearing up for another attack. "Captain, the Zothar flagship is preparing another pulse," Roshni, the communications officer, reported, her voice tight. "They're not giving us any time to recover. We need to act fast." Emily's thoughts snapped into focus. If they didn't act now, they wouldn't have a chance to recover. The Resilience was heavily damaged, and without full shields and power, it wouldn't survive another direct hit from that superweapon. But there was one thing she knew for certain. They couldn't run. They couldn't show weakness. Not now. "Lieutenant Marcus, target their flagship. We need to disable their superweapon," Emily commanded. Her voice was steady, filled with resolve. Marcus nodded, his fingers flying over the control panels as he reoriented the ship's weapon systems. "Aye, Captain. Weapons online. Ready to fire." "Do it," Emily said, her eyes narrowing as she locked her gaze on the Zothar flagship. She could see it looming in the distance, its massive form dwarfing the other ships in the fleet. The Zothar knew no mercy, and if they didn't act decisively, their lives would be forfeit. The Resilience fired a volley of energy blasts toward the Zothar flagship, each shot carefully aimed to disable the superweapon's core. The blast struck the massive vessel, sending shockwaves through space. But despite the damage, the flagship didn't falter. It kept charging up its weapon, its energy readings spiking as it prepared for another devastating pulse. "They're charging it up again, Captain," Marcus called out. "We won't have much time before they fire." "Get us in close," Emily ordered. "We're going to have to disable the superweapon manually." The Resilience shot forward, its engines roaring as it closed the gap between them and the flagship. The Zothar fleet tried to intercept them, but Emily's crew was quick, maneuvering the ship with skill and precision. The Resilience dodged a barrage of enemy fire, the ship's hull vibrating under the strain of each close call. Every movement, every decision mattered now more than ever. Emily's eyes were fixed on the Zothar flagship as they neared it, its massive hull growing larger with each passing second. She could see the faint glow of the superweapon's core, the source of the immense energy that threatened to annihilate them. She knew that if they could disable it, the Zothar would lose their advantage, and the tide of the battle could shift in humanity's favor. But getting close enough to do that was another challenge entirely. "Captain, we've got incoming fire from the Zothar fleet," Roshni warned. They're launching everything they've got at us." The entire ship shook as a barrage of plasma fire rained down on them. The crew shouted commands as they fought to stay in control of the ship, weaving in and out of the enemy fire. Emily could hear the sounds of explosions and alarms as sections of the ship were rocked with each hit. She felt the pressure building. Time was running out. "Status report on the reactors," Emily demanded, her voice sharp. If the Resilience couldn't power its weapons and shields at full capacity, they wouldn't stand a chance. "The auxiliary reactor is offline, Captain," Marcus responded. "We're down to backup power, but we can still fire our weapons. For now." "Good. We need to make this shot count," Emily said. "Weapons, lock on to the Zothar flagship's superweapon core. Fire at will." The Resilience fired its remaining energy blasts, sending them toward the heart of the Zothar flagship. The blasts connected, striking the core and sending massive shockwaves through the flagship's systems. The enemy vessel shuddered as its weapons flickered, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. Had they done it? Had they finally disabled the Zothar's superweapon? The Zothar flagship continued to fight back, but its attacks became erratic, its targeting systems faltering. Emily knew that the damage they had done had crippled the Zothar flagship's ability to launch another devastating pulse. But the battle was far from over. The rest of the Zothar fleet was still out there, and they were not going to give up easily. "We've taken out their superweapon, Captain," Marcus said, his voice filled with relief. "But they're still a serious threat. We need to finish this before they regroup." Emily's mind was sharp, and she knew the battle was far from won. But for the first time since the Resilience had entered the Zothar fleet's kill zone, she felt a spark of hope. They had survived the worst, and now they had the upper hand. They could win this. "Prepare for another assault," Emily commanded. "We may be damaged, but they'll never expect us to fight back this hard. All hands, brace for the next phase of the battle." As the Resilience prepared for its next move, Emily looked out at the stars, a fierce determination burning in her chest. Humanity had come a long way since those early days of struggle. They had fought through adversity, defied the odds, and now they were standing at the precipice of something greater. This was their moment, and they weren't going to let it slip away. With a final, resolute nod, she turned back to face the battle unfolding before them. "We will not go quietly into the dark," she whispered to herself. "This is humanity's fight, and we will finish it." The last stand. The Zothar flagship was crippled, but the battle was far from over. As the HMS Resilience maneuvered through the wreckage of the Zothar fleet, Emily Hawke's mind raced. They had managed to disable the superweapon, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though they might have turned the tide. But the enemy wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when they were this close to victory. The Zothar ships were relentless. Despite the damage to their flagship, the remaining fleet had regrouped, and they were preparing for one final desperate push. The vast armada moved as one, circling the Resilience like a pack of hungry wolves closing in on their prey. Each ship in the fleet was brimming with firepower, and it was clear they had no intention of letting humanity walk away unscathed. Emily stood at the center of the bridge, her hands gripping the console as she surveyed the tactical display. The Resilience was damaged, with shields failing and several key systems offline, but it was still operational. Barely. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with concern, "they're closing in. We've got no way of outrunning them, and our weapons are down to limited power. We need a plan." Emily's gaze locked onto the swirling mass of Zothar ships on the display. The odds were stacked against them. There was no denying that. But she wasn't about to let her crew go down without a fight. She had learned something throughout the course of this war. Humanity's strength didn't lie in their firepower alone. It was in their ingenuity, their refusal to accept defeat, and it was in the unity of their people. "We're not running," Emily said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We'll fight. And we'll win. We've taken down their flagship's superweapon, But we're not done yet. We need to hit them where it hurts. Their command structure. We need to break their coordination. Understood. Marcus replied, already working to reconfigure the Resilience's systems. But Captain, even if we take out their command vessels, we're still facing a fleet of warships that can wipe us out in minutes. We're outgunned and outnumbered. Emily nodded. She knew the risks. But she also knew that if they didn't act decisively, they were finished. Humanity's future depended on their success in this fight. There was no second chance. Bring up the fleet's formation, Emily commanded. She watched as the tactical display shifted, highlighting the Zothar ships in a series of concentric circles. The flagship, though damaged, was still at the heart of the formation, surrounded by its protectors. Emily's mind worked quickly, analyzing the enemy's strategy. Their fleet is organized, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. If we can break their command chain, they'll fall apart. We need to take out their leadership ships, specifically the 3 heavy cruisers at the rear of their formation. Once we disrupt their command, the rest of the fleet will lose its cohesion. But Captain, Roshni said, looking at the display with concern, those cruisers are heavily protected. There's no way we can break through their defenses without heavy casualties. Emily's eyes flickered to the damage reports streaming in from various sections of the Resilience. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. But there was no other choice. They had to act now. We'll create a diversion, Emily said, her tone resolute. Lieutenant Marcus, can we reconfigure the remaining drones to make a full assault on their front lines? Something to draw their fire and open a gap for us. Marcus's hands flew over the console, his fingers moving quickly as he worked to make the necessary adjustments. It'll take everything we have left in the drone systems, Captain, but it's possible. We'll send a swarm of drones in, make it look like a full-on assault. It should be enough to draw their attention while we move in on the rear. Emily nodded. She trusted her crew implicitly. They had been through hell together, and she knew they had the courage to see this through. Do it, she said, her voice cold and determined. And make sure we hit those command cruisers with everything we've got. The crew sprang into action. The Resilience's remaining drones were quickly reconfigured, their weapons primed for one final assault. The crew worked with a sense of urgency, knowing this would be their only shot at surviving the oncoming wave. Every second counted. Drones away. Roshni called out as the drones launched, forming a massive cloud of decoys and attack vectors aimed directly at the Zothar fleet's front lines. The Zothar responded immediately, unleashing a torrent of fire upon the drones, their weapons cutting through the air in deadly arcs. Now, Captain, Marcus shouted, his voice filled with adrenaline. We've got a clear path to the cruisers. They're distracted by the drone assault. This is our chance. The Resilience lurched forward, its engines firing as it closed the distance between itself and the Zothar command ships. Emily's heart raced in her chest, but she kept her focus sharp. Every moment was crucial. As the Resilience moved into position, Emily gave the order. Fire everything we've got. Target the cruiser's engines first. Take out their mobility. The Resilience's remaining weapon systems roared to life, firing a barrage of energy blasts that struck the rear cruisers. The first shots hit their engines, sending a ripple of shockwaves through the Zothar fleet. The cruisers tried to retaliate, but their movements were sluggish, their precision off. The damage to their engines had thrown them into disarray. Direct hit on their propulsion, Marcus reported. They're crippled. The cruisers are disabled, but they're not out of the fight yet. We need to finish them off. Target their weapon systems and fire again, Emily commanded. The Resilience unleashed a second volley, striking the Zothar cruiser's weapon systems. Explosions erupted from the cruisers, their hulls rupturing as they were torn apart by the concentrated fire. One by one, the Zothar command ships fell, their power and coordination crumbling. We've done it, Marcus said, a note of disbelief in his voice. They're broken. Their command structure is in chaos. Emily felt a surge of triumph. It wasn't over yet, but this was a major victory. The Zothar fleet, once an organized and overwhelming force, was now in disarray. The Resilience had disrupted their command chain, and the rest of their ships were losing coordination. "Prepare for another round of fire," Emily ordered. "Let's mop up the remaining Zothar ships. We can't afford to let them regroup." As the Resilience turned back toward the remaining enemy ships, Emily's mind flickered to the people of Earth. She thought of the colonies, the innocent civilians, and the brave men and women who had fought and died in this war. Their sacrifices had not been in vain. Humanity had proven that they could stand against the galaxy's most powerful forces and survive. "Take them down," she whispered to herself. "For Earth, for humanity." The Resilience continued its assault, its weapons firing in synchronized blasts, tearing through the remaining Zothar ships. One by one, they fell, their massive forms disintegrating in the wake of the Resilience's wrath. The Zothar had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. The battle wasn't over yet, but Emily knew this. Humanity's will to survive could never be broken. And as long as there was breath in her lungs, she would fight to ensure that the human race would never again be at the mercy of anyone or anything ever again. The turning of the tide. As the wreckage of the Zothar fleet drifted silently into the cold vacuum of space, Emily Hawke stood on the bridge of the HMS Resilience, her eyes scanning the tactical display. The once overwhelming force that had threatened to wipe out humanity was now reduced to scattered debris and crippled ships. The Zothar's coordinated attack had faltered, their command structure shattered, their fleet in disarray. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Emily felt a flicker of hope. "Captain, the remaining Zothar ships are retreating," Lieutenant Marcus reported, his voice a mixture of relief and caution. "We've forced them into a withdrawal, but they're regrouping. Some are attempting to jump into hyperspace. We can't let them escape." Emily's heart pounded. It was a victory, yes, but it wasn't a complete one. Not yet. The Zothar were dangerous when cornered, and they would not go down quietly. Their retreat was tactical, a way to regroup and come at them again with renewed force. They needed to finish this fight before the Zothar could recover. "Set course to intercept their retreating forces," Emily ordered, her voice unwavering. "We can't afford to let them escape to regroup. We finish this today." The crew sprang into action. The Resilience's engines fired as the ship pivoted to engage the fleeing Zothar. The remaining ships of their fleet were damaged, but still formidable, enough to pose a serious threat if they managed to escape and call for reinforcements. Emily knew this was a critical moment. If they let the Zothar regroup, humanity's fight for survival would drag on for much longer than necessary. But even as she issued orders, something gnawed at the back of Emily's mind. The Zothar's retreat was calculated, too calculated. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It felt like they were being herded into a trap, drawn into an ambush, and the realization sent a cold chill through her spine. "Captain, there's a sudden energy spike on the Zothar flagship's location," Roshni, the communications officer, reported. "It's impossible. Their systems should be down, but they're firing up again." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Show me." On the tactical display, a new signal flared to life. The Zothar flagship, though damaged and drifting, was emitting a massive energy pulse, far larger than anything they had encountered. It seemed as though the ship had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. The energy signature grew stronger, a prelude to something catastrophic. "Can they really still have that kind of power?" Marcus muttered in disbelief. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Emily said, her mind calculating the threat. "Get us out of here. Now." But it was too late. The Zothar flagship had already unleashed its final weapon. A wave of searing energy shot from the flagship, cutting through space like a blade, and it was aimed directly at the Resilience. The intensity of the blast was unlike anything Emily had experienced before. The shockwave of the weapon distorted the very fabric of space around it, pulling at the Resilience like a tidal force, pushing the ship to the brink of collapse. The bridge was engulfed in a terrifying flash of light, followed by a deafening roar as the ship's systems went into overdrive, struggling to maintain balance. The crew cried out as the ship lurched violently, and the lights flickered. The bridge was thrown into darkness for a split second before emergency systems kicked in. The alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to stay in their positions. "Report," Emily shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Her mind raced, calculating damage reports even as the ship trembled beneath her feet. "We've taken catastrophic damage to our forward shields," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "Hull integrity is down to 20%. The energy pulse overloaded our systems. Engines are offline, and several of our weapon systems are destroyed." Emily's stomach sank. The Resilience was hanging on by a thread, its power waning as the Zothar flagship's final weapon had struck a devastating blow. They were vulnerable now, floating in space with no way of escaping the remaining Zothar forces. The flagship had one last card to play, and they had fallen right into its trap. "We can't give up," Emily said, her voice firm despite the mounting pressure. "We're not finished yet. We still have one chance to survive this." "Captain, the Zothar are closing in," Roshni reported. "They're coming in fast. If we don't act quickly, we'll be sitting ducks." Emily's mind worked furiously. The Resilience was crippled, and their weapons were useless. The crew was injured, and the enemy was closing in. There was only one option left, something bold, something desperate, but it was risky. "Marcus, I need you to reroute power to the secondary engines," Emily commanded. "I want us to make one last push. We're going to crash into their fleet and create a diversion. If we can take out even one of their remaining ships, it'll buy us the time we need to escape." Marcus hesitated. "Captain, are you suggesting we ram them? The ship can't take it. We'll lose everything." "I'm suggesting we make sure we don't lose everything," Emily replied, her voice resolute. "This is humanity's final stand. We either go out fighting, or we don't go out at all. We don't let them win this." The crew was silent for a moment, the weight of Emily's words sinking in. Then, one by one, they nodded. There was no hesitation. They understood. They had all come this far together, and now they were prepared to do whatever it took. "Reroute power," Marcus said, his voice low with determination. "We'll make it happen, Captain." The Resilience groaned in protest as its secondary engines powered up, sending the ship hurtling forward at full speed. The Zothar fleet, seeing the human ship's desperate maneuver, reacted with confusion and anger. They had underestimated humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything. "Full speed ahead," Emily ordered, her heart racing as she watched the Zothar ships draw closer. "Brace for impact." The Resilience shot forward, the engines straining under the pressure as the ship careened toward the nearest Zothar vessel. The crew held their breath as they hurtled toward their target. Emily's hand gripped the armrest. Her body braced for the inevitable collision. With a deafening crash, the Resilience slammed into the side of a Zothar warship. The ship shuddered violently as their hulls connected, but Emily could feel a surge of satisfaction. The Resilience had done its job, punching a hole in the Zothar defenses, disrupting their fleet formation. Explosions erupted across the Zothar ship as the Resilience collided with it, her secondary engines overloading with the force of the impact. The Zothar warship staggered, its shields faltering under the assault. The remaining ships in the fleet opened fire, but their aim was thrown off by the chaos. Emily knew this would give the crew just enough time to regroup, to make one final escape. "Get us out of here now," she yelled. The crew scrambled, working quickly to disengage the Resilience from the wreckage and fire up the engines for one final jump to safety. As the Resilience pulled away, the damage to the ship was evident, but Emily could feel a renewed sense of purpose surging through her. The tide had turned. The Zothar fleet was in disarray, their command shattered. Humanity had made their stand, And now, they had won the day. "Jump us to the nearest safe zone," Emily ordered, her voice steady. The Resilience shot off into the depths of space, leaving the chaos of the battle behind. But Emily knew this was only the beginning. They had survived, today. And that was something humanity could build on. It wasn't just about winning battles. It was about surviving the impossible and proving that no force in the galaxy could ever truly crush the human spirit. "Prepare for the next chapter," Emily whispered to herself, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. "Because this fight is far from over."